Welcome to the channel. Today, we'll learn what truly matters in a Muslim's life.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the eyes of every conscious human being who takes a moment to reflect, life often appears as a race measured in currency, in bank balances, in property deeds, in the size of one's house or the brand of one's car. Yet when a Muslim pauses and looks toward the guidance given by Allah and the teachings left behind by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a completely different picture emerges. One where wealth is not the measure of a person's worth, where money is not the yardstick by which success or failure is judged, and where the true value of a human being is tied instead to faith, character, sincerity, and the state of the heart. This reminder is not meant to discourage anyone from working hard, from earning a lawful living, or from seeking comfort for themselves and their families, because Islam never asked its followers to abandon the world or to reject the blessings that come from honest effort, but rather it asked them to place money in its proper place, as a tool and a test, never as a god, never as an idol, silently worshipped through obsession, and never as the final measure of a person's dignity before Allah or before other people. When we look around today, we see a world driven almost entirely by material success, where people are respected because of what they own rather than who they are, where a person driving an expensive car is greeted with more warmth than a person walking with dusty shoes, where someone living in a grand house is assumed to be wise and accomplished, while someone living in a small rented room is assumed to be a failure. And this way of thinking, though common, is deeply against the spirit of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, lived a life that completely contradicts this materialistic standard. For despite being the leader of a growing nation, despite guiding armies, treaties, and entire communities, he lived with extreme simplicity, sleeping on a mat that left marks on his body, going days without a fire being lit in his home to cook food, and often having nothing but dates and water for sustenance. If wealth were truly the measure of greatness, then surely the most beloved man to Allah would have lived in luxury. Yet he chose simplicity, not because he could not afford comfort, since gifts and wealth from conquest came to him regularly, but because he understood that true honor lies elsewhere, in taqwa, in sincerity, in service to Allah and humanity, not in gold or silver. Islam teaches that the real wealth of a person lies in the richness of the heart, not the fullness of the pocket. A hadith reminds us that true richness is not having a lot of money, but true richness is the richness of the soul, meaning contentment, gratitude, and inner peace hold more value than any amount of currency a person could ever accumulate. A person may have millions in the bank, yet feel restless, anxious, empty, and dissatisfied, always chasing more, always comparing himself to someone wealthier, always feeling as though he has not yet arrived, while another person may have very little in worldly terms, yet feel completely at peace, grateful for every blessing, content with what Allah has given, sleeping soundly at night without the burden of greed weighing on his chest. This difference cannot be explained by bank statements. It can only be explained by the condition of the heart. And this is precisely what Islam emphasizes when it teaches that dunya, the worldly life, is temporary and deceptive, capable of blinding a person to what truly matters if he allows it to consume his thoughts and actions. There is a beautiful concept in Islam that speaks directly to this issue. The idea that a person's value before Allah is not determined by how much he owns, but by his taqwa, his consciousness and fear of Allah, expressed through good deeds, honesty, humility, and compassion toward others. The Quran reminds believers that neither their wealth nor their children will bring them closer to Allah, but rather what draws a person nearer is faith and righteous deeds. This single teaching alone dismantles the materialistic mindset that has crept into many hearts today. A mindset where people judge their own success purely by financial milestones, where children are raised to believe that becoming a doctor, engineer, or businessman is the highest achievement in life, while spiritual growth, moral character, and closeness to Allah are treated as secondary concerns or hobbies to be pursued only in spare time. Islam flips this entire structure, insisting that success is ultimately spiritual, that the real winner in life is not the richest man in the graveyard, but the man whose scale of good deeds is heavy on the day of judgment. The man who feared Allah in private and in public, who gave in charity even when he had little, who treated people with kindness even when he had every reason to be arrogant. It is important to understand that Islam does not condemn wealth itself. And this distinction must be made clear, because some may misunderstand this reminder as a call toward poverty or an argument against ambition. On the contrary, many companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, were extremely wealthy. Individuals like Uthman ibn Affan and Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, who used their riches to support the early Muslim community, funding wells, feeding armies, and caring for the poor. Yet despite their wealth, they were never remembered for the size of their fortune, but for the generosity of their hearts and the sincerity of their intentions. Wealth in their hands became a means of worship rather than a source of arrogance, a tool for helping others rather than a wall separating them from the less fortunate. This is the balance Islam teaches. A balance where a person may work hard, earn abundantly, and enjoy the blessings of this world, but never allow that wealth to control his heart. Never allow it to become the definition of his identity, and never allow it to distract him from his ultimate purpose of worshipping Allah and preparing for the hereafter. One of the greatest dangers of measuring life by money is that it creates a false sense of security, tricking people into believing that wealth can protect them from hardship, illness, loneliness, or even death itself. Yet history and everyday life continuously prove this belief false. For we see wealthy individuals suffering from severe depression despite having everything money can buy. We see rich families torn apart by conflict and mistrust despite living in mansions. And we witness countless examples of people on their deathbeds realizing that all the riches they accumulated over decades cannot buy them even a single extra breath of life. Money cannot heal a broken heart. It cannot replace a lost loved one. It cannot grant peace of mind. And it certainly cannot save a soul on the day of judgment. This is why the Quran describes the love of wealth as something that can distract and even destroy a person spiritually if left unchecked. Warning that competition for more and more material accumulation occupies people until death overtakes them, at which point they realize how fleeting and insignificant their worldly pursuits truly were. A Muslim who internalizes this reminder begins to see life through a different lens, no longer measuring their own worth or the worth of others by financial status. Instead of feeling inferior because they cannot afford the same luxuries as their neighbors, they focus on strengthening their relationship with Allah, on becoming a better parent, a more honest employee, a more compassionate friend, and a more sincere worshipper. Instead of feeling superior because they have more money than others, wealthy believers who understand this teaching remain humble, recognizing that everything they have is a trust from Allah, not a personal achievement to boast about, and certainly not a reason to look down on those who have less. This mindset transforms entire communities breaking down class barriers that so often divide people, encouraging the wealthy to support the poor, not out of pity, but out of brotherhood, and encouraging the poor to maintain dignity and self-respect despite their financial circumstances, knowing that their honor comes from their character and faith, not from their bank balance. It is also essential to reflect on how this reminder applies to raising the next generation. Many parents today, often unintentionally, teach their children that success is defined by financial achievement alone, pushing them toward careers that promise high salaries while neglecting to nurture their spiritual development, moral character, and connection to their faith. Children raised in this environment often grow into adults who feel a persistent emptiness despite achieving financial success, unable to understand why they feel unfulfilled despite having everything they were taught to desire. If parents instead raised their children with the understanding that money is a means, not an end, that career success should never come at the expense of prayer, honesty, or kindness, then future generations would grow up with a healthier relationship with wealth, pursuing it as a tool for good rather than an obsession that consumes their entire existence. Reflecting further on this topic, we must also consider how Islam teaches believers to view poverty and hardship not as punishment or evidence of Allah's displeasure, but often as a test that can bring a person closer to Allah if faced with patience and gratitude. Throughout Islamic history, many of the most beloved figures, including several prophets, experienced significant financial hardship at various points in their lives, proving that poverty does not diminish a person's status before Allah, just as wealth does not automatically elevate it. What truly matters is how a person responds to whatever circumstances Allah places them in. Whether they remain grateful during times of abundance and patient during times of scarcity, whether they use whatever resources they have, however small, to help others rather than hoarding everything for themselves out of fear and insecurity. This reminder becomes especially relevant in today's digital age, where social media constantly bombards people with images of luxury, success, and material accumulation, creating an illusion that everyone else is living a perfect, wealthy, problem-free life while comparing themselves unfavorably against these curated online personas. Many people fall into deep dissatisfaction, envy, and anxiety simply from scrolling through their phones, watching others display expensive vacations, designer clothing, and luxurious homes, forgetting that these displays often represent only a small, carefully selected portion of someone's actual life, hiding debts, family problems, health issues, and spiritual emptiness behind a polished exterior. A Muslim who remembers that life is not measured by money becomes immune to this constant comparison trap, understanding that chasing an image seen online is chasing an illusion, while chasing closeness to Allah is chasing something real, eternal, and deeply fulfilling. There is profound wisdom in the way Islam encourages believers to look at those who have less than themselves rather than those who have more, specifically to cultivate gratitude and contentment rather than envy and dissatisfaction. This teaching directly counters the natural human tendency to constantly compare upward, always noticing what others have that we lack, rarely pausing to appreciate what we already possess. By shifting focus toward those facing greater hardship, whether financial, physical, or emotional, a believer develops empathy, gratitude, and a renewed appreciation for blessings that might otherwise be taken for granted, such as health, family, shelter, and faith itself. This shift in perspective does not diminish ambition or discourage improvement, but it prevents the destructive cycle of never feeling satisfied, no matter how much is achieved. a cycle that traps countless people in perpetual dissatisfaction, regardless of their actual financial standing. Ultimately, this reminder circles back to the core purpose of human existence as understood in Islam, which is to worship Allah, to live righteously, and to prepare for the hereafter, a purpose that has absolutely nothing to do with the size of one's bank account. On the day of judgment, no one will be asked how much money they earned, how large their house was, or how many luxury items they owned. Instead, they will be questioned about how they earned their wealth, whether through lawful or unlawful means, and how they spent it, whether in the path of Allah or purely for personal indulgence and show. Wealth accumulated through dishonest means, exploitation, or corruption will become a burden rather than a blessing, weighing heavily against the person on that day, while wealth earned honestly and spent generously will stand as a testimony in favor of the believer, proof of gratitude translated into action. A Muslim who truly internalizes that life is not measured by money begins to experience a profound shift in daily living, finding joy not in what they can purchase, but in what they can give. Finding peace not in accumulation, but in contentment. And finding purpose not in competing with neighbors, but in striving to please Allah. This does not mean abandoning effort or ambition, for Islam encourages believers to work diligently, to seek lawful provision, and to improve their circumstances through legitimate means, but it means keeping wealth in its proper place as a servant to serve the believer's higher purpose rather than a master controlling the believer's every decision and emotion. When money becomes secondary to faith, when success is measured by closeness to Allah rather than closeness to material possessions, life transforms into something calmer, more meaningful, and infinitely more fulfilling than any amount of wealth could ever provide. As this reminder draws to a close, it becomes clear that the real measure of a successful life according to Islamic teaching lies not in gold, silver, property, or status, but in sincerity of worship, kindness toward others, honesty in dealings, patience during trials, and gratitude during blessings. A person may leave this world with nothing but a humble grave. Yet if their heart was filled with faith and their life was filled with good deeds, they leave as one of the truly wealthy in the eyes of Allah, which is the only wealth that ultimately matters. May every believer reflect deeply on this truth, releasing the exhausting burden of measuring their worth through material accumulation, and instead finding lasting peace in the understanding that true success, true honor, and true richness are found not in what a person owns, but in who a person becomes through faith, character, and devotion to Allah.